Hey guys, I am here to talk to you about your test 4 and help you answer the questions that go along with the study guide. So let's go ahead and get started on that. There's a couple different topics that we're going to talk about. And as I talk about these topics, I will make sure to cover all the questions that are needed for you to be able to successfully fill out your study guide. The first topic is on the Civil War. And the big thing that you want to know about the Civil War for this test is going to be the causes of it. And the most immediate cause of the Civil War is going to deal with Lincoln being elected. When Lincoln was elected, he had no approval from the South. And the South thought that Lincoln was going to use his position to ban slavery. And that is why they're going to secede. So when it comes to Lincoln's election, the reason why this starts the Civil War is because of a fear of him banning slavery and having zero support in the South, making the South feel very unwanted and not interested in being a part of the United States anymore. For the Battle of Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg is going to be incredibly significant because this is going to stop a Southern invasion of the North. The South, which was being led by Robert E. Lee, was trying to invade the North at this point. And the Battle of Gettysburg is going to be the Northern forces stopping that invasion. It's also a big turning point in the war. After this, the South is not going to win many major battles. Now, there are two major speeches that you need to know about, both of which have different impacts. So the Gettysburg Address, as you might imagine, was given after the Battle of Gettysburg. And it is going to try to increase the morale of the North or the fighting spirit of the North. It said that the North needed to keep fighting, to keep pushing to bring together the country and restore the Union that was once promised under the American Revolution. But the big thing you want to know is that it was all about trying to motivate and continue the fight in the Civil War, because at this point, the North was a little bit low. The Emancipation Proclamation is going to change the reason for why the war was fought. Before the Emancipation Proclamation, the war was fought mainly to try to bring the North and the South back together. With the Emancipation Proclamation, it's going to introduce the idea that the South is holding millions of Africans enslaved. And because of that, the South needs to be stopped. So it's going to change the reasoning for the war from it being about just bringing the South back to the United States to instead it being about ending slavery. Now, with talking about slavery, we should talk about the evolution of African American rights during this time period. Black rights are going to go from a very low point to a relatively high point, back down to a low point during this period. So let's first start with the very beginning of this period, the Dred Scott case. What did the Dred Scott case say about Black rights? So it's going to say that people that were enslaved cannot sue for their freedom, or they cannot sue in general because they were not citizens under the law. So the big thing is no citizenship for people that were enslaved. Now, after the war, there's going to be Reconstruction amendments. There's the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. The 13th Amendment is going to end slavery. The 14th Amendment is going to overturn this Dred Scott case. It's going to say that all people born in the United States are citizens under the law. So now all people that were enslaved are now citizens. It also states that all citizens are equal under the law, and that's going to be important when we talk about the Jim Crow laws. The 15th Amendment is going to stop people from being denied the right to vote based off of race. For the Compromise of 1877, and I'm going to get to that Carpetbaggers and bayonet rule in a second, but for the Compromise of 1877, this ended the Reconstruction time in the South. The North is going to move its military out of the South. And because of that, Southerners are going to take back control of their respective states. And this is really the beginning of African Americans losing a lot of the freedoms that they had under the Reconstruction time. In Reconstruction, African Americans were able to vote pretty easily. After the Compromise of 1877, African Americans are not going to be able to vote very easily. Most African Americans are going to be working as sharecroppers. Sharecroppers were farmers who did not own the land that they were working on. This kept most Black people very poor during the Jim Crow era. The Jim Crow laws are going to be Jim Crow laws are going to be laws that are going to target African American rights, specifically the right to vote. But it's also going to state that African Americans and white people can be separate. This is going to lead to the segregation of the South. Plessy versus Ferguson was the Supreme Court case that officially stated that this was allowed, that this segregation was allowed as long as it was separate but equal. However, we do know that that was not strictly enforced or was not enforced at all. The equality part, things were separate, but they were not equal. All right, so now for the carpetbaggers and bayonet rule. So carpetbaggers, bayonet rule was when the military was down in the South. Carpetbaggers were Northerners who came down and worked in the South during Reconstruction. The South had a lot of resentment towards both of them. In fact, they hated both of them. The South is going to dislike Reconstruction a lot while it benefited African Americans. They felt like it was too heavy of a burden for the South to have to pay for the war. And because of that, had a lot of animosity or anger towards it. When it comes to Booker T. Washington or W.E.B. Du Bois, they're going to be two influential Black leaders post Plessy versus Ferguson, although they had different ideas. Booker T. Washington is going to want to keep Black communities separate. He's not going to be as much into integration. And he is going to think that Black people should go after different types of jobs that white people aren't going after, mainly farming and handwork. W.E.B. is going to be an intellectual. So because of that, he believes that freedom is going to come through education. And he's going to focus a lot on the top 10% smartest individuals in the Black community to try to save the Black community. So Native Americans are going to be negatively affected by railroads because railroads are going to move more white settlers out west. It's going to make Western land more valuable. And who lived on that Western land? Native Americans. So Native Americans are not going to be able to continue their tribal nomadic lifestyle in peace. They're going to have to move on to reservations. Reservations were small pieces of land dedicated towards Native Americans. They were disliked greatly by Native Americans. One, because a lot of Native Americans were used to roaming, being nomadic. But also, the land was not very good quality. Water points, water access, fertile ground, all of that was not very good. Native Americans felt like Congress had overstepped their bounds, considering Native Americans saw themselves as a sovereign nation, meaning they should be separate from the United States. The Dawes Act was an attempt to compromise with Native Americans by giving Native Americans individual plots of land for their family. This was to hope that Native Americans would move away from their tribal lifestyle. This relates to assimilation because assimilation is the idea that you're going to become more like somebody else. The Dawes Act was trying to make Native Americans more like white people or like Westerners who lived with nuclear families as opposed to with their tribes. Somebody who's going to resent and resist against the reservation system is going to be Sitting Bull. He was the main leader of the Sioux. And he led resistance against Native Americans or against the United States government for a long time. And that's going to end at Wounded Knee. At Wounded Knee, Sitting Bull is going to be killed. And the United States is going to kill hundreds of unarmed Native Americans. This stops Native Americans from continuing on resisting the reservation system. It's after this that Native Americans are going to move on to the reservations. And that's in 1890. It's an important year to kind of denote that. For immigration, the big connection between immigration and industrialization is that industrialization created a bunch of cheap jobs. Immigrants are going to be attracted to these cheap jobs. Immigration is going to change, though, in the 1870s. We're going to move away from a lot of the European immigrants being Irish and German, and instead, they're going to be Italian and Russian Jews. This is a big deal because Italians and Russian Jews were not nearly as similar as Irish people were to the English settlers that had been here for a while. We call them Anglo-Saxons. For example, the language that they spoke. Russian Jews spoke Russian. Italians spoke Italian. Irish spoke English. So because of that, they're not going to be able to blend into the culture as easily, and that's going to lead to a lot of nativism. Most immigrants are going to settle in the northeastern cities like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, some Midwestern cities as well, like Chicago, St. Louis, Milwaukee. Because the United States is going to have a massive form of immigration, there is going to be a strong nativist sentiment. This means that there is going to be people who dislike the immigrants heavily, and there's going to be laws and societies created to try to stop or limit the number of immigrants that can come to the United States during this time. Also, political machines are going to become very powerful in northern cities. Political machines were corrupt politics where they controlled the immigrant vote by giving them services, but allowed for democracy to basically go unchecked. Both Jacob Riis and Jane Addams wrote about the horrible conditions that immigrants had to live in and tried to make immigrant lives better as part of the progressive era. Now, during this time of industrialization, businesses are going to grow a lot. There are several different ways that they are going to help, or the government is going to help businesses grow. The first is laissez-faire economics, which is basically there's not going to be rules that the businesses have to follow and how they treat their workers or what they have to pay their workers or safety procedures. This is going to mean that businesses can grow by treating their workers not the best. However, that did not mean that businesses and government did not have a relationship. A lot of businesses were actually benefited by the government through subsidies. Subsidies are going to be payments or breaks given to businesses to help them grow. The biggest example of this is when the Transcontinental Railroad was being built. The US government is going to give a lot of the land to railroad companies for free. Why would they do this? Well, these businesses did have some positive impact. Number one, it is going to increase the production of goods, which made goods much cheaper. But number two, businesses are going to be able to influence the government with a lot of their power. They're going to be able to influence the Senate, for example, because at this point, the Senate was not elected by the people. They were elected by a small group in the states. This small group could be easily influenced by businesses. All right, so the effects of these businesses growing are going to be one, monopolies. This is a consolidation or where businesses gobble each other up until there's just one mega business left that has no competitor. Due to this, they can treat workers however they want because there's no other game in town. The other is going to be this idea of social Darwinism. With all this new wealth coming into play, people are going to have to justify their wealth. And they did this with social Darwinism by saying that the reason why wealthy people are wealthy is because they're smarter. And the final thing is the gospel of wealth. This is almost a combating of this idea, and that wealthy people needed to take care of the poor and the community that they lived in, that it was the rich's responsibility to take care of the poor. And while there was impressive gift giving by Andrew Carnegie and John Rockefeller, they still were vastly more wealthy than other people. All right. For the progressive era, there are going to be some things that are going to combat the growth of business. The first is going to be the labor unions. Labor unions organized workers so that they could create collective rights, so they could be treated better. Ida Tarbell is going to go after businesses, specifically the Standard Oil Company, by explaining how this did not benefit society and how they actually used corrupt business practices to gain their power. Theodore Roosevelt is going to enforce the Antitrust Act and break up monopolies. This last part is really important because we didn't talk about this that much in class, which is that the middle class is going to be a lot of these progressive reformers. The middle class saw how much distance the rich had gotten on them, and they didn't like that. And so a lot of the people who organized the progressive era reforms were the middle class workers. Women are also going to combat the growth of business during the progressive era by taking a big leadership position in a lot of the progressive era reforms. So both the middle class and women took big leadership roles in the progressive era reforms. And our last topic is imperialism. So two ideas are going to really lead to imperialism. The first is Frederick Jackson Turner. He wrote something called the Frontier Thesis, which stated that the United States needed to continue to go conquer new land to both thrive as a society and also to basically continue to evolve. Alfred Thayer Mayer stated that for this to take place, for this imperialism to take place or getting new land, the United States needed to have better access to the Pacific Ocean by building the Panama Canal, which they did, and getting a strong navy. Both of these ideas are going to be crucial under Theodore Roosevelt's presidency, who really was the first president to fully embrace imperialism. The last thing is the Spanish-American War is going to lead to several different possessions of different lands, including Guam, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines. Philippines are going to rebel against American authority and government. And that is going to be kind of the second fight, which is the Filipino-American War, where the Philippines were trying to resist American control. That led to a lot more debates on imperialism, if the United States should be imperializing different countries or not. All right, and hopefully this will help you. If you study this, you will do better on your test, I promise. It covers most of the information.